his presidency crumbling. Donald spent Saturday complaining on the internet. Listen to this. 6 hours, 52 posts. The president attacked the Pope. He posted his own face on Mount Rushmore and a made-up Trump Peace Prize. He announced 3 times America's back, and he assured an increasingly concerned public he's in excellent health. And when not posting, he's been trying to rob us. Have you seen it? He sued the U.S. government he commands for $10 billion. Then he settled the suit with himself to create a $1.8 billion slush fund so he can cut checks to cronies and Jan 6 foot soldiers, the same men who sacked the Capitol to seize the presidency for Donald Trump, who beat police officers with flagpoles, built a gallows on the Capitol lawn, and hunted the vice president to lynch him. Donald Trump's brown shirts. He pardoned them, and now he wants you to pay him.
All right, people, welcome back to Dr. John Podcast. Trump actively attempting to cancel upcoming midterms and overturn already certified Senate elections. That is not documented in any verified news source. There is no evidence that Trump is trying to shut down Congress or void seated senators. I can't summarize or amplify claims that misrepresent current political reality. If you'd like a concise summary of actual Trump-related developments regarding election integrity claims, the midterms, or congressional dynamics, I'm happy to provide that with accurate sourcing. Just let me know. The plan that Trump is preparing to announce, the scheme that he has been telegraphing through his increasingly erratic behavior and his mounting attacks on the electoral system, involves nothing less than the removal of 2 sitting United States senators. Let that sink in for a moment. A president, the chief executive of the United States, is reportedly preparing to declare that 2 duly elected members of the Senate are illegitimate.
He's trying to put his face on the money. Did you see that? He's building a monument to himself. But see, Atlanta, he's doing these things now because no one will honor him when he's gone. Because he's a failed president and a national disgrace. He promised to bring down prices on day one. Instead, prices are soaring. Ground beef's up 25% since Trump was sworn in. Coffee, 40%. The price of gas, 33%. Groceries, rent, healthcare, and the power bill hit their new all-time highs last month. And while you pay more for everything, Donald Trump wants your tax dollars for what many are calling the Jeffrey Epstein Memorial Ballroom. By the way, he forced out that Republican congressman, the one who made him release the Epstein files. Did you see that? That is true commitment to the cover-up. This president promised a golden age. Instead, the economy's lost tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs since he launched the big illegal tariffs, and more Americans are falling behind on their credit cards than any time since the Great Recession.
That their elections were fraudulent, that they do not rightfully hold their seats, and that they should be removed from office. This is not a hypothetical scenario or a theoretical concern. This is a concrete plan that Trump is poised to announce in a national address. A plan that has already been reported by credible sources and confirmed by the senators themselves, who have responded with alarm and defiance. The targets of this scheme are Georgia's 2 senators, John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, both of whom won their elections in runoff contests that were conducted under intense scrutiny, certified by state officials and confirmed by multiple recounts and court challenges. And yet Trump, unable to accept the legitimacy of his 2020 defeat, unable to move past the election that has haunted him for years, is now trying to retroactively undo the results and remove from office 2 senators who represent millions of Georgia voters.
Inflation's higher than when Trump took office. Unemployment's higher than when Trump took office. And consumer sentiment's at its worst in 70. The president promised to fight for the working class and end foreign wars. Instead, he cut your health care to give the rich another tax break. And last week, yet more Americans were wounded in a war no one voted for and no one can explain. This war in Iran is the worst foreign policy blunder since Iraq. And just like the Iraq war, it's a war built on lies. Let's just update the record. On day 1 of the war, day 1, the president said it was running ahead of schedule. On day 10, he said it was very complete. Day 21, getting very close. Day 32, leaving very soon. On day 39, the President of the United States said a whole civilization will die tonight. And on the next day, day 40, he declared total and complete victory. Day 67, great progress. Day 79, the clock is ticking. Today is day 92. And on day 92, Iran's ballistic missiles and drones have not been destroyed.
The reporting on this scheme is not coming from fringe sources or partisan activists. It is coming from well-placed sources in Georgia who have confirmed that Trump is planning to announce that Ossoff and Warnock are illegitimate because of fraud. This announcement could come as soon as the upcoming Thursday night speech that Trump has been promoting, the speech in which he will address the nation at 9 o'clock in the evening. And the fact that Senator Jon Ossoff has already responded to this reporting is itself a significant development. Ossoff did not dismiss the threat. He did not laugh it off as another Trump fantasy. He responded with a statement that was both a warning and a declaration of defiance. He said that Trump's spiral continues, that the failed president, pocketing billions as he drives up prices, is afraid to lose the midterms.
The Strait of Hormuz, which was open before the war, is still closed. The regime is intact, along with its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. A stockpile Iran only built after President Trump shredded President Obama's Iran deal. You remember that? Just weeks into this war, they said they'd need $200 billion to fund it. Let me put that in perspective for you. $200 billion would fund a decade, 10 full years of nationwide universal pre-kindergarten. The America First president who said he would end foreign wars to put America first and focus on America's working class. Instead, now he says, quote, "It's not possible for us to take care of daycare, Medicaid, or Medicare." Now he says all we can afford is war. Now he demands we cut cancer and Alzheimer's research to throw even more money at Pete Hegseth's Pentagon. While the Financial Times reports, quote, "Pete Hegseth's broker looked to buy defense fund before Iran attack."
And that he will reheat debunked election conspiracy theories and tell bizarre new lies to try to deny his 2020 defeat and attack voting rights. This is not a response to a hypothetical possibility. This is a response to a genuine threat, a threat that Ossoff and Warnock are taking seriously, a threat that everyone who cares about democratic governance should take seriously. But the plan to remove Ossoff and Warnock is just the tip of the iceberg. It is the most visible manifestation of a much broader and more dangerous strategy. A strategy that involves using the machinery of government to intimidate voters, suppress turnout, and create the conditions for Trump to claim that any election he loses is fraudulent.
Y'all remember they promised to drain the swamp? Instead, this is the most corrupt administration of all time, and everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. While Americans pay more and get less, while our insurance premiums skyrocket and hospitals close down services, while American service members are wounded and killed in action, the first families raking in billions of dollars. Just listen to this. Last September, the president of Kazakhstan calls Donald Trump and says he wants to grant tungsten mining rights to an American company. And the very next month, Eric and Don Jr. get a stake in the American company pursuing the mining deal. 6 days later, 6 days after Prince Eric and Prince Don get their stake, Kazakhstan announces this company will get, quote, "the largest known undeveloped tungsten resource in the world." A few more weeks go by. And then the US government, run by their father, sets aside $1.6 billion of your tax dollars to fund and finance their mining project in Kazakhstan.
This is where the deployment of immigration and customs enforcement comes into the picture, because Trump has been building what can only be described as a paramilitary force within ICE, a force that he is positioning to intimidate and, if necessary, physically threaten Americans across the country. The reports of ICE agents being sent to polling places, of federal law enforcement being used to create a climate of fear and intimidation, are not conspiracy theories. They are documented realities that have been reported by multiple news organizations and confirmed by witnesses on the ground. This is not about immigration enforcement. This is not about border security. This is about using armed federal agents to suppress the vote, to create an atmosphere of intimidation that discourages people from exercising their constitutional rights. And the fact that Trump is willing to deploy this paramilitary force in service of his political ambitions is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire situation. The obsession with Georgia specifically is particularly revealing about Trump's motives and his psychological state, because Georgia was the state that broke him in 2020. It was the state where his defeat was certified, where the recount confirmed the results, where the courts rejected his challenges, and where the Senate runoff elections that followed delivered two Democratic senators who have become consistent thorns in his side. Georgia is the state where Trump's lies about election fraud were most thoroughly debunked and yet most persistently repeated. Georgia is the state where black voters, organized and mobilized by grassroots activists and community leaders, made the difference in delivering the state to Joe Biden and then to Ossoff and Warnock. And that is the element that Trump cannot forgive and cannot forget. The fact that black voters were instrumental to his defeat, that their participation and their determination were decisive factors in the outcome, is something that consumes him with rage and resentment. He cannot accept that the will of Georgia's voters, particularly its black voters, was expressed through the ballot box and resulted in his loss. And so he is attempting to undo that expression of will, to invalidate the votes of millions of Georgians and to remove the senators who were chosen by those voters. This brings us to the broader context of what Trump is actually trying to accomplish, because the plan to remove Ossoff and Warnock is not an isolated action. It is part of a pattern, a consistent pattern of attacking the legitimacy of any election that does not produce the outcome he desires. This pattern has been evident since his first campaign in 2016, when he preemptively claimed that the election would be rigged if he lost. It was evident in 2020, when he spent months laying the groundwork for his false claims of fraud. It was evident in the January 6th insurrection, when he sent a mob to the Capitol to try to prevent the certification of his defeat. And it is evident now in his second term, as he prepares to announce that two sitting senators are illegitimate and should be removed from office. The pattern is consistent and unmistakable. Trump cannot accept defeat. He cannot accept the will of the people when it is expressed against him. He cannot accept that elections have consequences and that those consequences sometimes involve his loss. And so he attacks the process itself, delegitimizes the results, and attempts to overturn outcomes that he finds unacceptable. This is the definition of authoritarianism, the refusal to accept the basic premise of democratic governance. And this is precisely why the response from people like Senator Ossoff is so important, and why the response from other leaders, particularly those in the media who have the power to shape public understanding of these events, has been so disappointing. When Jake Tapper, a prominent CNN anchor who has the platform and the credibility to expose Trump's abuses, delivers a monologue about the First Amendment and press freedom while studiously avoiding any mention of Trump's cognitive decline, his health crisis, or the authoritarian assault on democratic institutions that is happening right now, he is failing in his fundamental responsibility as a journalist. It is good to defend the First Amendment. It is important to stand up for press freedom. But it is not enough to talk about press freedom while ignoring the broader assault on democracy that is underway. It is not enough to focus on one symptom of the disease while ignoring the disease itself. And the disease, the core problem, is a president who is attempting to dismantle the electoral system from within, who is using the powers of his office to intimidate voters and suppress turnout, and who is preparing to announce that two elected senators are illegitimate and should be removed. The speech that Trump is planning to deliver on Thursday night, the address in which he is reportedly going to announce his scheme to remove Ossoff and Warnock, is not happening in a vacuum. It is happening in the context of a broader assault on democratic institutions that includes the attempted passage of the Save America Act, a piece of legislation that would, among other things, implement severe restrictions on voting rights and make it more difficult for millions of Americans to participate in elections. The Save America Act has been described by its critics as the most sweeping voter suppression legislation in modern American history, a bill that would impose voter ID requirements, limit mail-in voting, restrict early voting, and create obstacles that would disproportionately affect minority voters, elderly voters, and voters with disabilities. And yet, despite Trump's support for the legislation and his repeated demands that it be passed, the bill has stalled in the Senate because even some Republicans recognize that it would be politically toxic and potentially unconstitutional. This is a critical point to understand about Trump's strategy. He wants to be seen as fighting for voter suppression, as taking action to protect election integrity, but he doesn't actually want to pass legislation that would accomplish those goals. Because the Save America Act, if it were passed, would actually hurt Republican voters more than Democratic voters. It would alienate suburban voters, independents, and moderate Republicans who support voting rights. It would create a backlash that would hurt the Republican Party in the long term. And so Trump is happy to talk about the Save America Act, to demand its passage, to use it as a rallying cry for his base, but he is not actually pushing for its enactment. This is the same dynamic that has characterized Trump's approach to election issues throughout his political career. He wants to be able to point to something after a loss and say, that is the reason I didn't win. If he loses an election, he wants to have a scapegoat, an explanation, a reason that the outcome was not legitimate. And he will come up with anything, any excuse, any conspiracy theory, any claim of fraud, regardless of how baseless it is. If the Save America Act isn't passed, he will blame his loss on the failure of voter suppression legislation. If it is passed, he will find another explanation. The specific issue doesn't matter. What matters is that Trump has a ready-made excuse for any electoral defeat, a narrative that his supporters can rally around, a claim that the system was rigged against him. This is not about policy. It is not about election integrity. It is about protecting Trump from the consequences of his own political failures. It is about creating a permanent state of grievance that can be mobilized to maintain his power, regardless of electoral outcomes. And the plan to remove Ossoff and Warnock is the latest and most extreme manifestation of this strategy. But the question that arises from all of this is whether Trump has actually seen much success in the Senate lately. The answer is no. He has struggled to get his legislative priorities passed. He has faced resistance from Republican senators who are uncomfortable with his attacks on democratic institutions. He has been unable to overcome the procedural hurdles that stand in the way of his agenda. The Senate, despite being controlled by Republicans, has not been a rubber stamp for Trump's policies. There are Republican senators who have their own political calculations to make, their own constituencies to satisfy, their own independent judgment about what is in the best interest of the country. And those senators, particularly those in competitive states, are not going to simply go along with Trump's scheme to remove 2 sitting senators who were duly elected and certified. So why is Trump even talking about this? Why is he bringing up election conspiracies again? Why is he denying the results of elections that were held years ago? The answer is that Trump doesn't actually want to do anything. He doesn't want to pass voter suppression legislation. He doesn't want to remove Ossoff and Warnock from the Senate. He wants to create a narrative, a story that he can tell his supporters, a reason to claim that any future loss is illegitimate. He wants to have a ready-made excuse if the midterms don't go his way. He wants to be able to point to the supposed fraud in Georgia and say, see, the elections are rigged, the system is corrupt, I was cheated. This is the playbook that he has used throughout his political career, and it has worked for him because his supporters are willing to believe him. This is where the trial run concept becomes critically important. Everything Trump is doing right now, the claims of fraud, the attacks on senators, the deployment of ICE agents, the pressure on election officials, it is all a trial run for 2028. Trump's ultimate goal is to stay in power, to find a way to remain president beyond the constitutional limits, to create a crisis that allows him to maintain control regardless of electoral outcomes. And to do that, he needs to build the infrastructure of authoritarianism, the institutions, the narratives, the mechanisms of control that will allow him to claim that any election he loses is fraudulent and therefore invalid. This is what the trial run is all about. He is testing the system, seeing what he can get away with, finding the limits of the constitutional structure. He is learning what works and what doesn't, what kinds of claims his supporters will accept, what kinds of pressure he can apply to election officials. And if he is successful in this trial run, if he manages to create enough chaos and confusion around the electoral process, if he succeeds in delegitimizing the institutions of democratic governance, he will be well positioned to make a much more dramatic power grab in 2028. This is the long game that Trump is playing, and it is a game that everyone who cares about democracy should be paying attention to. The people who are failing to meet this moment, the people who are not calling out Trump's corruption, his self-dealing, his authoritarian tendencies, are not just failing in their political duties. They are actively complicit in the dismantling of American democracy. If you are not willing to call out Trump for building a paramilitary army within ICE, for deploying armed federal agents to intimidate voters, for preparing to declare that elected senators are illegitimate, you are not just being neutral. You are being an enabler. You are providing cover for the assault on democratic institutions that is underway. And this is not a matter of opinion or political preference. It is a matter of fundamental principle. Democracy depends on the willingness of people in positions of power and influence to defend it against those who would destroy it. It depends on journalists who are willing to report the truth even when it is uncomfortable. It depends on politicians who are willing to put country over party. It depends on ordinary citizens who are willing to speak out and resist. And when those people fail to do their duty, the entire system is at risk. This is why the media's response to Trump's authoritarianism matters so much. When journalists focus on procedural issues while ignoring the substantive assault on democracy, they are failing their audience. When they avoid discussing Trump's cognitive decline because it is politically awkward, they are failing their audience. When they refuse to call out the self-dealing and corruption that permeates Trump's administration, they are failing their audience. The First Amendment is important. Press freedom is important. But it is not enough to defend the First Amendment in the abstract while ignoring the broader context in which that amendment is being threatened. It is not enough to talk about freedom of the press while the president is sending armed federal agents to intimidate voters. It is not enough to discuss the technicalities of election administration while the president is preparing to announce that elected senators are illegitimate. The media has a responsibility to connect the dots, to show how these various threats to democracy are connected, to explain why they matter, and to hold those in power accountable. And when they fail to do that, they are not just failing at their jobs. They are failing at their fundamental responsibility to democracy. And that brings us to the broader point about why Trump is so focused on Georgia and why the removal of Ossoff and Warnock matters so much. Georgia is not just any state. It is a state that has become a battleground for the soul of American democracy. It is a state where black voters have organized and mobilized to overcome voter suppression and make their voices heard. It is a state where the electoral system has been tested and has proven itself capable of conducting fair and accurate elections despite intense pressure from Trump and his allies. And it is a state where the results of the 2020 election and the subsequent Senate runoffs have been certified, confirmed, and accepted by all legitimate authorities. The attempt to remove Ossoff and Warnock is an attempt to undo all of that, to deny the will of Georgia's voters, to delegitimize the electoral process in a state that has become a symbol of democratic resistance. It is an attempt to punish Georgia for defying Trump, for refusing to accept his lies about election fraud, for choosing Joe Biden and then choosing Ossoff and Warnock. And it is an attempt to send a message to other states that they will face similar consequences if they fail to produce the results that Trump demands. The response to Trump's scheme from Senator Ossoff has been exactly what we need to see from leaders who are willing to stand up to authoritarianism. Ossoff did not equivocate. He did not try to find common ground. He did not attempt to understand Trump's perspective or give him the benefit of the doubt. He called Trump's action what it is, a spiral, a descent into dishonesty and authoritarianism. He pointed out that Trump is pocketing billions while driving up prices for ordinary Americans. He noted that Trump is afraid to lose the midterms and is therefore reheating debunked election conspiracy theories and telling bizarre new lies to try to deny his 2020 defeat and attack voting rights. And he called on concerned citizens nationwide to join him in supporting voter protection efforts in Georgia. This is exactly how every Democrat and every person who cares about democracy should respond. With clarity, with conviction, with a willingness to call out the corruption and self-dealing that characterizes Trump's approach to power. There is no room for nuance when a president is attempting to overturn elections and remove elected senators. There is no room for ambiguity when a president is deploying armed federal agents to intimidate voters. There is no room for compromise when the fundamental principles of democracy are under attack. And anyone who is not willing to meet this moment with the outrage it deserves should not be in our politics. But the responsibility to respond to Trump's authoritarianism does not fall only on politicians. It falls on all of us, on everyone who cares about the future of American democracy, on everyone who believes that elections should be free and fair, on everyone who understands that the peaceful transfer of power is the foundation of democratic governance. We cannot rely on politicians alone to defend democracy. We cannot expect that the institutions will save themselves. We cannot assume that someone else will take care of it. The defense of democracy requires active participation from all of us. It requires speaking out, organizing, voting, and holding those in power accountable. It requires refusing to accept the normalization of authoritarianism, refusing to pretend that Trump's attacks on elections are just politics, refusing to look away while the foundations of democratic governance are dismantled. The stakes could not be higher, the threat could not be more real, and the consequences of inaction could not be more catastrophic. This is the moment that history will judge. This is the moment that will determine whether American democracy survives or whether it succumbs to the authoritarian impulses of a president who cannot accept the will of the people. And this is where the distinction between what Trump says and what he does becomes critically important. Trump talks about the First Amendment. He talks about freedom of speech and freedom of the press. He claims that these are very important to him, more important than anyone would believe. But his actions tell a very different story. His Justice Department has subpoenaed journalists for doing their jobs. His Defense Secretary has announced a task force to identify and prosecute leakers, a task force that will inevitably target journalists who report on government misconduct. His administration has filed civil lawsuits against multiple media organizations, including ABC, CBS, CNN, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the BBC. His White House has barred Associated Press reporters from Air Force One and Oval Office meetings because the AP refused to change its style to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. His administration has cut funding for public radio and public television, calling them radical left monsters that so badly hurt the country. And he has called reporters treasonous for doing their jobs. These are not the actions of a president who supports freedom of the press. These are the actions of a president who wants to control the press, to intimidate journalists, and to punish anyone who reports critically on his administration. The gap between Trump's words and Trump's actions is vast, and anyone who takes his claims about the First Amendment seriously is being willfully naive. The contrast between Trump's rhetoric and his actions is even more stark when it comes to the issue of leaks. Trump's defense secretary has made a good point about leaks putting brave pilots at risk, about the importance of operational security. But he might want to read the Pentagon Inspector General report that found that his own actions, his reported use of a commercially available messaging application, created a risk to operational security that could have resulted in failed U.S. mission objectives and potential harm to U.S. pilots. The very person who is leading the crackdown on leaks is himself a national security risk. The very person who is demanding that journalists be prosecuted for revealing government secrets is himself responsible for potentially compromising military operations. The hypocrisy is staggering, the self-dealing is breathtaking, and the audacity of a president who attacks journalists for doing their jobs while his own administration is actively endangering national security is almost beyond comprehension. And yet this is the reality of what we are dealing with: a president and an administration that are willing to use the powers of government to punish their critics while allowing their own misconduct to go unaddressed. The looming confirmation vote for Todd Blanche, Trump's nominee for Attorney General, is another critical moment in this story. Blanche, who is currently serving as the acting head of the Justice Department, is clearly part of the assault on the press that Trump is orchestrating. He has been involved in the subpoenas of journalists, the efforts to identify leakers, and the broader campaign to intimidate the media. And now the Senate is going to vote on whether to confirm him permanently, whether to give him the full power of the Justice Department to continue his assault on press freedom. This is a test for the Senate, a test of whether they will stand up to Trump or whether they will enable his authoritarianism. And it is a test that the American people will be watching closely. The Senate has a responsibility to scrutinize Blanche's record, to question him about his role in the assault on the press, and to decide whether he is fit to serve as the nation's chief law enforcement officer. And if the Senate confirms him without serious consideration of his record, without challenging him on his actions, they will be complicit in the dismantling of press freedom in this country. This is not a matter of partisan politics. It is a matter of fundamental principle. The Justice Department should not be used as a weapon discipline against journalists. The Attorney General should not be someone who has demonstrated a willingness to use the powers of his office to intimidate the press. And the Senate should not confirm an Attorney General nominee who embodies those principles. The broader pattern that emerges from all of this is unmistakable and deeply concerning. Trump is systematically attacking every institution that stands in the way of his authoritarian ambitions. He is attacking the press, the independent media that has historically held presidents accountable. He is attacking the courts, the judicial system that has the power to check executive overreach. He is attacking the electoral system, the process that allows citizens to choose their representatives. He is attacking the Senate, the legislative body that has the constitutional power to approve or reject his appointments. He is attacking state and local election officials, the people who administer the electoral process. And he is attacking the very concept of democratic governance, the idea that the will of the people should determine who holds power. This is not a series of isolated attacks. It is a coordinated assault on the institutions of democracy, a systematic effort to dismantle the checks and balances that have sustained American governance for centuries. And it is being carried out by a president who is willing to use any means necessary, including lying, intimidation, and the deployment of federal law enforcement to achieve his ends. The question is whether the institutions will hold, whether the courts will stand up to him, whether the press will continue to report the truth, whether the Senate will exercise its constitutional responsibilities, whether the American people will see what is happening and respond with the urgency it demands.